Welcome again to the upper room. Thanks for inviting us into your homes, into your groups. We're going to dive deep quickly. Sorry about that. I know it would be nice to start in a shallow fashion. We're going to go deep very quickly with this discussion question. What is the most difficult thing you have had to learn in your lifetime? And here's what's going to make it more challenging. I need you to answer that in less than a minute. So think about it here for a few minutes, and then I want you to discuss that question, but again, only in less than a minute. We really cannot afford to have you share for an hour at this moment. So in less than a minute, the most difficult thing you've had to learn in your life. Now, the reason I asked that question is because this lesson for me might be the answer to that question in my life. The most difficult thing I've had to learn or learn to deal with. And that brings us to our location. We are at Columbine Middle School. It's where I attended school as a 7th grader, actually. My house was just a couple blocks away. And it's not the school itself that's important. And in fact, it's a brand new building since I was a kid back in the 70s, early 70s. But it's the location that matters to me today. Where you see these new buildings standing was once just a large patch of grass. And I had a group of friends when we were in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. And we were the Sandlot. If you've ever seen the movie The Sandlot, we were a group of guys, again 8 or 9 or 10 guys who played baseball together every day in the summer. Summer is about to end here, and there's a lot of weeping by the children and a lot of cheers of joy by most parents. But we're close to the end of the summer, and I remember that feeling because we spent all summer in the patch of grass behind me that was once behind me, playing baseball. All right, and there were days when we didn't have 8 or 9 guys to play, but rather we only had 3 or 4. That didn't stop us. We did this all summer. When we only had 3 or 4 of us, we would play something we called pickle. All right, now what is a pickle? In baseball terms, a pickle is when a runner gets hung up in between bases and they're running him down, throwing the ball back and forth until they can tag him out. On some occasions, rare occasions, there will be an overthrow or the runner can elude them and get safely to the next base. That actually is one of the most exciting plays in baseball. It happens maybe once or twice a game, but we would play a game called pickle where we did that on purpose. We'd have 2 bases and 2 guys with gloves and a ball and a guy who was running the bases in between, and just run back and forth until we could either elude them or they would tag us out. That was pickle. Not to be confused with pickleball. Pickleball was invented in the early 70s on Bainbridge Island, Washington, and the ball that's used in the sport of pickleball, which was invented by a family, had a dog named Pickle, and he would run and get the ball for them and retrieve it and bring it back. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about pickle. And it is a fun game to play as kids. We played it all the time. It's something we could play in our backyard actually as well, and we did that often. But it presents a dilemma for the base runner. We have base runners. It presented the dilemma for the base runner, which direction to go and how would he elude and get out of this situation. Now, you know, and I love pickles in general because I love them on sandwiches and hamburgers, but now on the bigger scale, on the more important scale of life in general, a pickle is simply a difficult or messy situation. That comes into play today, and it comes into play in our lives. And for me personally, this lesson, as I wrote it, I found that it was for me. I needed this lesson, all right? So you may not need it, but you can sit in and watch me teach the lesson for myself. Or maybe, just maybe, you do need this lesson as well about what I believe to be one of the most difficult pickles in life. We're in a series, of course, we're calling Dynamic, and we're coming to the end of the series. We're in chapter 28 of the book of Acts, of 28 chapters, and Paul is on a voyage. He has been on a voyage, if you haven't been with us, from Caesarea to Rome. He left Caesarea 2 months ago. It's a ship carrying 276 men, and they have hit a nor'easter. They called those, back in those days, a eurykio. And it would be a storm with hurricane force winds, and it resulted in them becoming shipwrecked. And they're about to find out where they are. They had no idea. They'd been driven for 14 days by this storm. And God had promised 2 things through Paul to the entire group of men on the ship. And number 1 was they would be shipwrecked. But number 2, they would all survive. He's on his way to Rome because, number 1, Jesus had told him, you will go to Rome. So he's confident in that. But also, you might not realize that Paul has always wanted to go to Rome to preach the gospel and to visit the churches that have been planted in Rome. Some believe that Peter, the Apostle Peter, planted those churches in Rome. I take you to Romans chapter 1, verse 11, written most likely about 58 AD from Corinth by Paul. And he writes this, I long to visit you so I can bring you some spiritual gift that will help you grow strong in the Lord. When we get together, I want to encourage you in your faith, but I also want to be encouraged by yours. So I'm eager to come to you in Rome too, to preach the good news. A lot going on there, but he says, I want to go. And when I go, I'm sure I'll preach the good news and I'll share spiritual gifts with you. But don't miss that little phrase that he uses, I want to encourage you and I'm sure you'll encourage me. And for those who tend to miss or consider lightly the gathering of the followers of Christ, like it's not a real big deal, we'll go when we can, you're missing that. You're missing the opportunity to, number 1, encourage, which we're called to do, and be encouraged. But that's what Paul says, I long to do that. Jump down to Romans 15:23, but now I have finished my work in these regions. Okay, he's in Corinth again. And after all these long years of waiting, I am eager to visit you. So Jesus promises him he'll go. He wants to go. He's on his way. But now they've become shipwrecked. And something's going to happen once they get onto the island. Again, they don't know which island it is. They've been fighting the storm for 14 days, day and night. We will pick it up with that context, them arriving on an island. But it is what happens on that island, something I think is just incredibly significant, that is something we still deal with in life today. It's what I refer to as one of the most difficult things I've had to learn, and am still having to learn. So here we go, Acts chapter 28, verse 1. Once we were safe on shore, we learned that we were on the island of Malta. Okay, this is, I've mentioned this before, but this is where they created Malta Mill. If you ever wondered, ever ate Malta Mill, they created it there. Maybe not. Malta is an island that is 58 miles to the south of Sicily. It's 17 miles long, 9 miles wide. It's not a huge island. It is inhabited by Phoenicians. They speak neither Latin nor Greek, but they're also not barbarians, as you're about to see in this story, in this event that takes place. By the way, if we were to travel, if we had the finances for us all in the upper room to travel to Malta, it's still there. And there on the northeast coast of Malta is what is still called St. Paul's Cove, which is in St. Paul's Bay. There's even a little island in the midst of that bay they call St. Paul's Island. If we were to travel to that little island, you'd see a statue of Paul. So if you begin to think, oh, this is all just, story, that we talk about, fairy tales. No, to this day, it is acknowledged that Paul was shipwrecked here with these other men. It's historically accurate. Verse 2, the people of the island were very kind to us. It was cold and rainy, so they built a fire on the shore to welcome us. Unlike the days in the 50s when Jim Elliot and his other missionary friends landed in Ecuador and were met with natives that killed them, this is not the case for Paul and these 276 men who have swam to shore, and it's probably November, and it's rainy, and they're cold, And what's amazing to me, and maybe you haven't thought about it for a while, is that even pagan people know the difference between good and evil. We were watching a show the other night where they're talking about this Massachusetts governor who signed into law with women behind her applauding that now we can murder children the very second they're born. It's so exciting. And this panel of people who are all pagan, as far as I understand, were aghast at this, and they talked about how barbaric that is. And so how is it that these people on this panel, being pagans, know the difference between good and evil? Because it's imprinted in our hearts. Paul wrote about that in Romans 2:14. Even Gentiles who do not have God's written law show that they know his law when they instinctively obey it, even without having heard it. They demonstrate that God's law is written in their hearts, for their own conscience and thoughts either accuse them or tell them they are doing right. Even pagans that don't have the Ten Commandments or the Old Testament know there's something about life that there's right and wrong. Okay, so these pagans on Malta Island knew the right thing to do here would be to take care of these poor guys who have swam ashore, and they build a fire for them and try to be hospitable to them. We pick it up in verse 3. As Paul gathered an armful of sticks, I want to pause there. Paul's the hero of this whole thing, right? I mean, if it wasn't for Paul, God speaking through Paul, would they have survived? Who knows? But they all now adore Paul. He's the hero. He's the one that told them they'd survive, gave them the hope, told them what to do, when to do it. And so he's the hero that could sit and be served. And yet, Paul gathers armfuls of sticks to help build the fire. He has a servant's heart. There's no job too low for this apostle. So as Paul gathered that armful of sticks and laid them on the fire, a poisonous snake driven out by the heat bit him on the hand. Now, if you're highly biblically knowledgeable, you might remember that in Mark chapter 16, at the end of the Gospel of Mark, it is written that Jesus said his followers will be bitten by snakes and they will never face danger. He had some other things along with that. And the issue there is, well, since that's happened, there's actually groups of followers, supposed followers of Christ, who have decided that's what their whole gathering will be about, is handling snakes, proving that they can't be harmed by poisonous snakes. Now, what you need to know is that that section of Mark is not in the original manuscripts, in the earliest manuscripts. And I would say, in my opinion, humble opinion, that that section of Scripture shouldn't be there. Because what it says that Jesus said is really incongruent with other things that he said. So I think it was put in there later, I don't know by whom, but in case you're wondering about that, answered that question hopefully for you. Now, let's move on to verse 4. The people of the island saw the snake hanging from his hand and said to each other, "A murderer, no doubt." Think about what they're saying, they're proclaiming. Now, why would they say that? Well, they probably learned fairly quickly that Paul was a prisoner and he was being guarded by a lot of soldiers. So maybe he's a serious criminal. He could be a murderer. I don't know. But now that he's been bit by a snake, we have no doubt he is a murderer. And they go on to say this: though he escaped the sea, justice will not permit him to live. What they're saying is this is a strong concoction that includes justice and karma. He survived the sea. He probably shouldn't have, but now he's going down. He got bit by a poisonous snake. But then we move on to verse 5. But Paul shook off the snake into the fire and was unharmed. Then Dr. Luke adds these details. The people waited for him to swell up or suddenly drop dead, but when they had waited a long time, I don't know how long this time was, maybe a few hours, and they're saying he's going to drop dead any time. We've had people get bit by that kind of snake. He's done. He didn't swell up. He didn't die. After several hours, it says that he wasn't harmed. Watch the next phrase. They changed their minds. After a couple hours, they have changed their mind. He's a murderer. He's going down. To, oh, they decided he was a god. Now you might recall that in Acts 14, Paul and Barnabas had been called gods. And you remember how Paul responded to that. They tore their clothes and he said, no, you don't dare call us gods. We will not allow that. So I'm sure he reacted the same way, but because it's just happened again, maybe Luke leaves that part out. I'm sure he addressed the issue that you're not going to call me a god. But that brings us to our first point in this lesson. And it is really the main point. And the point is this: we must acknowledge man's fickleness. All right? This is fickleness at work, right? He's a murderer. He's a god. I mean, all within a span of a few hours. Now, what is fickle? Fickle is defined by the dictionary is to change frequently. Okay, you don't stick with anything very long. And it goes on to say, especially in regards to loyalty, interests, and affection. When Christy and I were first dating 42 years ago, can you believe she's put up with me that long? I told her, I'd seen all our peers, do the dating thing, break up, get back together, break up, get back together. And so I expressed to her, as much as I was really enjoying getting to know her and dating her, if you break up with me, we'll be done forever. Never again will we be back together again. So just don't do that. I didn't realize it at the time, but even back 42 years ago, I was intolerant of fickleness, because that's what fickleness is. Oh, based on, my feelings and emotions, my loyalty, my affections, my interests will change based on the direction of the wind, okay? I am still convicted of that to this day. So this is where it gets very personal for me. And I'm just gonna flat out lay it out to you. One of the most difficult things in ministry, and specifically I'm talking about the 17 years of ministry here in Montrose prior to us beginning the upper room. And that is this. When I think of all the board meetings with elders that were sometimes boring and oftentimes a lot of bullying going on, and I add to that all the conflicts, a myriad of conflicts among staff people that had to be dealt with. When I think of all those, the one thing that affected me the most, and it is because it affected my family the most, was the constant nature of the fickleness of people. We are so blessed that our four adult sons walk with Jesus. It really is a miracle of God, because what they experienced growing up in this context, where we had so many people I can't even count for you and don't need to, but so many people who called us their friends, their good friends, their best friends, who loved everything that we were doing in ministry. And within, not hours, as is the case here, but certainly within weeks or months or a couple of years, turned not just to be not friends anymore, but literally despised me, thus despised my family. And for us to have to explain that over and over again to our kids, and that that's just the nature of man, and how our kids have made it through that and said, we worship God, not people, is really a miracle to us, because this was our life for 17 years. And so that's why I'm saying this lesson is, for me, it's about the fickle nature of man and how it affects us, and how to this day it's quite a challenge for Christy and myself when we see, and even in the upper room, we see the fickleness of man. It does not affect us as much as it did, because it affected our entire family all those years. In fact, I actually had a family member who asked me to perform his wedding for he and his fiance. I can remember exactly where I was standing when they asked me, and I said I would love to do that, but you need to stop living together before we do your wedding. Okay, you need now in the next 6 months to stop living together. And they would explain to me why they were living together, all the practical reasons. And I would tell them, I don't do weddings for people who are living together. We're asking God to bless this when in fact you're living in sin. It makes no sense. It's incongruent. When I explained that to them, what was a wonderful relationship I had with this family member ever since has become not just chilly, but cold. Okay, why? Because neither of those things happened. They did not stop living together, and I did not do their wedding. And so guess what? Our relationship with them has really become not much of a relationship because I did not agree to what they thought I should agree to. How fickle is that? I mean, that was a great relationship for decades. But because I was unwilling to acquiesce to their demand, no more relationship. That's the fickle nature of man. Was Jesus aware of this? John 2, we've read this many times. Let's read it again. Early in his ministry, verse 23, because of the miraculous signs Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many began to trust in him. Oh, Jesus, you're the best. You're the greatest. We love you. We heard that for a long time. But Jesus didn't trust them. What's the word trust? It's our favorite word in the upper room. Pistuo, it means to place confidence in somebody, to be sure of something. Jesus had no confidence in those people. He would not entrust himself to them. He did not believe that they were anything but fickle, is really what it's saying. Because he knew all about people. Verse 25, no one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart. Meaning, in each of us, we have this fickle nature. And it is not of God. If it was of God, Jesus would have applauded it. He said instead, I can't trust you because you live based on your fickle, sinful nature. You might remember that the Israelites were freed from hundreds of years of slavery in Egypt by miraculous plagues, and the Israelites stood with their toes in the Red Sea with the enemy bearing down on them, and God parted the Red Sea, and they walked across on dry land, got to the other side and looked back, and here came the enemy to kill them, and God drowned them all. They had experienced that, and yet we read from the pen of Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 9, we should not put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and they died from snake bites. Speaking of poisonous snakes, and don't grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the angel of death. These happened to them as examples for us. They were written down to warn us who live at the end of the age. What's going on there, right? The grumbling, the complaining, the testing of Christ in the wilderness. It's about people being fickle. Now, how did that happen? Which leads us to our next discussion question, and that is this. How would you define the term rabble-rouser? You've heard that term. How would you define it? Well, you may be shocked to know where the term rabble comes from, thus the term rabble-rouser, which will make sense. So when they left Egypt, and I wasn't aware of this until Caleb, our son, made me aware of it a couple of months ago. When they left Egypt, Exodus chapter 12, verse 37, we find something really interesting happening. That night, the people of Israel left Ramses in Egypt and started for Succoth. There were about 600,000 men, plus women and children. So over 1 million people left Egypt. A rabble of non-Israelites went with them, along with great flocks and herds of livestock. Did you ever notice that? A rabble. What's a rabble? Well, it's a group of people who don't naturally belong to the group we're speaking of or learning about. So other Egyptians who had come to respect the Israelites decided, we'd rather go with you. So they jumped on board and they left with them as well. Did you know that? We jumped to Numbers chapter 11, verse 4. Then the foreign rabble who were traveling with the Israelites, see, it's still happening. They didn't just leave. They're still traveling with them in the wilderness. They began to crave the good things of Egypt. And the people of Israel also began to complain. What are these? What is this? Rabble-rousing. It's a rabble who are rousing up discontent, fickleness. How great is it to be away from Egypt? We're free, we're free. But watch what the rabble-rousers are doing. They are complaining and saying, oh, I wish we had some meat. We remember the fish we used to eat for free in Egypt. And we had all the cucumbers and melons and leeks and onions and garlic we wanted. But now our appetites are gone. All we ever see is this manna. Is that not fickle? The fickle nature of man? after all that God has done for them, and now he's still meeting their needs, but they miss the fish. But they miss the fish. They miss the onions. You talk about fickle. I've mentioned Keith Green many times, the great songwriter and singer from the 70s into the early 80s. Most of his stuff is very worshipful. He also wrote and performed a couple fun songs, and one of them was the song, So You Want to Go Back to Egypt. Just a few lines, just humor me here. So you want to go back to Egypt where it's warm and secure when you thought you were sure? You wanted to live in the land of promise, but now it's getting so hard. Are you sorry you're out here in the desert instead of your own backyard? Well, there's nothing to do but travel, and we sure travel a lot because it's hard to keep your feet from moving when the sand gets so hot. And in the morning, it's manna hotcakes. We snack on manna all day, and we sure had a winner last night for dinner, flaming manna souffle. Isn't that great? That's about the fickleness of man. And I am going to confess to you again, it is one of the greatest challenges for me personally, is to tolerate the fickle nature of mankind. Now, one moment you're loved, the next moment you're hated. One moment they want to be with you, the next moment they can't stand you. And that's the way it is. And so that's been a struggle for us, for me. I came across this quote from Brant Hansen in his book Unoffendable, and it really spoke to me regarding this. See the human heart for what it is. Just acknowledge it is what it is. Adjust your expectations and be grateful, not angry. Look, you have free will, and you can be perpetually shocked and offended. Speaking to me. But be honest, isn't it kind of exhausting? He's right. It's just exhausting to be angry with people who are fickle. There's still, even in these days of the upper room, we still have a lot of fickle people that come and go. And it's easy to get angry, but he's right. All that does is wear you out. It doesn't honor God. And so there's that reality that we must acknowledge that mankind is fickle in nature. But now, between that passage and the next main passage, I want to make another point, and this is where it continues to be personal for me. We must be aware of our own fickle nature. I must be aware of my own fickle nature. And fickleness is a sin. It is a sin. I believe it is a sin to be constantly fluctuating with the wind, as James would say, tossed about like on the sea. Romans 3:23, of course, for everyone has sinned, we all fall short of God's glorious standard. That word sin, or martia, means to miss the target or miss the road or the way. So everyone has missed it at some point. Fickleness is just one way that we miss the target. And of course, Isaiah 64:6 in the Message says, we're all sin infected, sin contaminated. Our best efforts are grease-stained rags. That's a nice way of putting that verse. So on to our last discussion question. How would I know if I'm prone to fickleness? How would one know if he or she is prone to fickleness? How would we recognize it? Well, as you know, we live in the day and age of self-diagnosis. Get on WebMD. Who needs a doctor, right? Well, we're going to do self-diagnosis, okay? We don't have to go to a counselor to do this. Self-diagnosis. And I'm going to give you an acronym that might help you self-diagnose. It's kind of been helpful for me. And it is the acronym LOST. L-O-S-T. We begin with the L. And by the way, if these things are true of you, if these things are true of me, I might be living in Fickletown. I might even be the mayor of Fickletown. Okay, the L. The L is lack of conviction. If I lack conviction, then I'm probably going to just turn with the wind and go wherever it blows me. Of course, we've read this passage before. Jesus in Luke chapter 9, verse 57, as they were walking along, someone said to Jesus, "I'll follow you wherever you go." But Jesus replied, "You're fickle." No, he replied, "Foxes have dens to live in and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Because he's appealing to the reality of who they are. You'll follow me until it gets difficult, and it's going to get difficult. So I don't think you're going to follow me. Verse 59, he said to another person, "Come, follow me." The man agreed. "I'll follow you. You got it." But then he said, "Lord, first let me return home and bury my father." To which Jesus famously said, "Let the dead bury the dead. Come follow me now." Again, your response is a fickle response. "I'll follow you, but I got to do something else first." And then another one said to Jesus, "Yes, Lord, I'll follow you, but first let me say goodbye to my family." That's reasonable, right? Not to Jesus. You're being fickle. You're going to begin this journey with a fickle decision. You're saying you're committed to being with me, but you first want to go spend time with your family and not be with me? And then in verse 62, this famous thing he says, "Anyone who puts a hand to the plow and then looks back is not fit for the kingdom of God." What's he talking about? Anyone who says, "This is my conviction, I'm going forward," but you keep looking backwards, you want to go back to Egypt, he says, "You're not fit. You're not fit for the kingdom of God." Wow, would he say that to me? You're not fit. You're fickle. You're fickle. You say you want to plow straight ahead, you keep looking backwards to see where you've been. And that's the point, is that I need to deal with my lack of conviction, because it is conviction that steers the ship of my life. Or is it convenience? Or is it comfort? Or is it circumstances? I believe there are two groups of people in the world. One is a very large group, and it's the people whose lives are driven by circumstances. The circumstances are always changing, aren't they? Then there's a very small group of people that live their lives based on conviction. This is what I believe to be true, and it will not change. I will not change my mind about it, no matter how the circumstances change. So Paul writes letters from his prison cell in Rome. One of them is to the church in Philippi, and in Philippians chapter 1, verse 12, "I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me, all the changing, tumultuous circumstances that have taken place, has helped to spread the good news." The conviction, spread the good news. That's why I'm here. It's my mission. That's what I do. That's my conviction. All the other stuff is circumstances, and they all fit into my purpose. Philippians 4:11, "I have learned how to be content with whatever I have." I am content. My outlook on life does not change if I don't have as much as I used to have, or I have more than I used to have. That's not the point. I am content because convictions lead to contentment. While on the other hand, living your life based on circumstances, which are always changing, will lead to a fickle way of life. So, if I find myself living in Fickletown, chances are I'm living with a lack of conviction. Secondly, I'm easily offended. Author Frank Viola puts it this way: he believes Christians are more often offended and easily offended than anyone else. Do you agree? I take you back to Brent Hansen in his book, Unoffendable. "I used to be scandalized by others' moral behavior. I'm just not anymore." So what if Christians were known as the people you couldn't offend? There's something powerful and incredibly compelling about someone who refuses to be offended. Question: how easily am I offended? If I'm highly offended, then I will change my opinion about somebody. I will change my relationship with them very easily. I'm very fickle. The S of the LOST acronym is self-focused. Okay, if I live a self-focused life, I will constantly be changing my loyalties and my affections and desires. Supermodel Cameron Russell puts it this way: "I am insecure." If you are ever wondering, if I have thinner thighs and shinier hair, will I be happier? Well, you just need to meet a group of models, because they have the thinnest thighs and the shiniest hair and the coolest clothes, and then the most physically insecure people on the planet. Because they're so self-focused, right? It's never enough. Just last week, Dr. Anthony Fauci's diary came out. Remember that? Dr. Anthony Fauci in his diary said many alarming things, but one of them, that's probably not that alarming, probably confirms some things. He said, "I think I'm the most important person in the world." With that attitude, we're going to be very fickle, because everything revolves around us. Jesus' command to deny ourselves is the most difficult command, I believe, for us to obey. How are we doing at that? If I can't deny myself, then I'm probably going to live a very fickle life. And finally, the T of lost when it comes to whether or not I live in Fickletown is what I'm going to call a trend toward group think. What is group think? Groupthink is when loyalty requires each member to avoid raising controversial issues. Back in the early 80s, a study was done by Irving Janis, a social psychologist, and he came up with this idea of groupthink, and now it's actually in the dictionary, and the dictionary explains it this way. It's a pattern of thought characterized by self-deception, forced manufacture of consent, and conformity to group values and ethics. Okay, so that means I just want to go along with everybody. I got to think like everybody, do what everybody else is thinking. I'm a part of groupthink, and our media, our government, they know we are this way, and so they manipulate us. And so we are, most of us are members of groupthink, and the problem with that is that the groupthink is always changing. So we become fickle people. Of course, Romans 12:2, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. We are not to be thinking the way the world thinks. We're not to be thinking the way culture thinks. We're not to be a member of group think. Changing the way we think, then we'll learn to know what God's will is, His good and pleasing and perfect will. To know God's will, we got to quit thinking, along with everybody else, the same things. You simply cannot follow Jesus and be a member of groupthink. You simply can't. Look at Jesus' life. Was he a member of groupthink? No. His thoughts were always original, right from the Father, the Spirit, speaking through him. That's what we're called to be. If I can't do that, if I choose not to do that, it's uncomfortable, it's difficult, then I'm probably going to live in Fickletown. Pastor Ray Stedman put it this way: we live in a world of crooks and perverts. What an opportunity to be winsomely different. How about that? There's an idea. Okay, question for ourselves, I'll do it for me. Am I living in Fickletown? Am I possibly the mayor of Fickletown? Or more likely for me, the question is this: do fickle people trouble me to my core? And I'd have to answer yes. So what do I do about that? Well, we've acknowledged that it's a trait of mankind. Just acknowledge that I need to be aware of my own fickle nature. But third, we now need to adhere to God's faithfulness. We pick up this story in verse 7. Near the shore where we landed was an estate belonging to Publius, the chief official of the island. He'd be the Roman governor of Malta. He welcomed us and treated us kindly for 3 days. As it happened, Publius's father was ill with fever and dysentery. Paul went in and prayed for him, and laying his hands on him, he healed him. Then all the other sick people on the island came and were healed. Can you imagine an entire island of sick people coming, and Paul heals them all? Verse 10, as a result, we were showered with honors, and when the time came to sail, people supplied us with everything we could need for the trip. It was 3 months after the shipwreck that we set sail on another ship that had wintered at the island, an Alexandrian ship with the twin gods as its figurehead. Okay, there's some interesting details in there, but they're not that important actually. But the detail I want you to see is that by all appearances, and I'll tell you what tradition says, is that a church was planted in 60 AD by Paul because of this shipwreck, and that Publius, the Roman governor, became the first pastor of that church. And you can see by the way they showered him with gifts and sent them on their way lovingly, there's a great chance that they had become followers of Christ. But traditionally, that's what they say. The church began there. Why? Because of something terrible that happened. God always uses everything to bring honor to himself and advance his kingdom. So in this passage, what we do is we move our focus now from the fickle nature of man to the faithful nature of God, and you see it there. God's faithfulness, his goodness is seen in that he wants to help people who are sick and downtrodden. He extends mercy and care to all who are hurting. That's God's faithfulness, that's his nature, and that's now where we must focus. And so that's where I have to focus. I told you this message was for me. I have to focus on the faithfulness of God. I love how that passage ends. This is really about God, doing what God does in the midst of the reality that mankind is fickle, and yes, even believers, in air quotes, are fickle. We lived it. But even in the midst of that, we do life together in spite of that. I've used this quote before by D.A. Carson in his book, Love in Hard Places. Here it is again. The church itself is not made up of natural friends, it is made up of natural enemies. Christians come together not because they form a natural collocation, but because they have been saved by Jesus Christ and owe him a common allegiance. In this light, they are a band of natural enemies who love one another for Jesus' sake. Yeah, I struggle with people who are fickle all the time. I'm not called to do life with them because we have so much in common. It's my allegiance to Jesus and to honor him that we continue to do life together, even in the midst of the reality that we are fickle people. And it drives me crazy. So as you know, I like to wrap these lessons up with a story. Today it's our story. I've told you our story, that over 40 years of ministry, 17 of them here in Montrose in the local church. And up until that time, it was a pleasure doing ministry. It was a privilege. We knew it was a privilege, but it was enjoyable. But these 17 years here were brutal. And it was brutal beyond what even people in that church today would understand. And I told you the effect it had on us as a family. We stuck to it for 17 years until God allowed us to begin this wonderful ministry. I got to tell you that in the last 6 years of doing the Upper Room, ministry is enjoyable again. It's a pleasure again. It's not that it has to be enjoyable. It's just as though God is rewarding us for sticking to it all those years when people would abandon us all the time as friends because they didn't like something I said, something I did, something I didn't say, something I didn't do. The other day we were in Tucson, and from time to time we'll go to the Gaslight Theater. We thoroughly enjoy that place, and so we took Caleb with us. And as we were finding our seats down in front this time, usually it's not down in front, I heard behind me someone say, "Steve Shaw!" I looked back and my immediate reaction was, oh no. Because we used to hide from people in the church. We really did. We would hide from them. We would avoid them because it was brutal. It was so difficult, so challenging, so discouraging. But when I heard my name, I had an instant reaction of, oh no. And I turned around and we saw Steve and Tanya Field waving at us. Well, they're in the Upper Room in Tucson. I gotta tell you, this flood of joy and excitement came over me. Why? For whatever reason, God has decided that our time here in the Upper Room is one where it's not dominated by people who are fickle, who once say they're friends and later say they hate you. But it's a big deal, and we're so grateful. So that's our story. More importantly, here's Jesus' story. On the week before he was crucified, he came into Jerusalem, and the crowd cried out, "Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna. He's the King." A week later, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. Fickle? You think Jesus understands fickle? And in the midst of that, he says, "Father, forgive them. They do not know what they're doing." How I long to be like Jesus. Let me end with Psalm 118, verse 8. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in people. Yeah. We don't have to place our confidence in people. We place our confidence in the Lord. But we still do life with people, don't we? A huge lesson, right? Very personal for us. Being very raw with you. Trust that you overcome your fickle nature and go, that's okay. Let's keep doing life together. We love you. We love doing this journey with you. I think about the pickles that I was in the midst of back here with other kids my age and how fun it was. The fickle pickle is not fun. There's nothing fun about it. But the good news is we want to be like Jesus, and God is faithful, isn't he? God bless you all. We